Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we were taking a fascinating and, let's be honest, a somewhat uncomfortable look at the source material you brought in.
It's definitely challenging material.
It really is. It deals with something that's, universally desired, but at the same time, it's almost universally condemned in modern society. And that thing is power.
Right. And not the obvious kind of power. We're not talking about, armies or being the CEO.
No, exactly. This is about the subtle stuff, the hidden dynamics of social influence, the underlying mechanisms that really dictate success, your relationships, even just your peace of mind in life today. And our sources, they just lay out this wonderfully stark premise. It gets right to the quick. They argue that everyone, and they mean everyone, fundamentally craves power.
The feeling of being powerless is described as, and this is a direct quote, unbearable to us.
Unbearable. That's a strong word. And it leads directly to misery, to frustration. Yet, and here's the paradox, in our supposedly civilized world, the office, the university, the book club.
Anywhere, really.
We are socially obligated to appear fair and decent. You absolutely cannot, under any circumstances, look like you're power hungry.
And that right there is the profound tension. That's what defines our entire social existence. We're trapped.
Trapped how?
In this high-stakes, perpetual contradiction. On one side, you have the unbearable misery of being powerless. On the other, the profound social danger of seeming too ambitious, too strategic.
Or worst of all, manipulative.
Exactly. The M word. So our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack the precise, required strategies for navigating that contradiction.
The source material has a great phrase for it. It calls them the cunning yet congenial methods.
Cunning yet congenial. It's perfect. Because if you fail to master that duality, you risk being absolutely crushed. And not by some evil tyrant. You get crushed by the people around you who have already, whether they know it or not, mastered this game of indirection.
So we're sort of defining the playing field. And the core thesis is coming out of this study is, well, it's a bit dramatic. It's that our current social dynamic,
whether you're a programmer, a teacher, an artist.
Right. It most closely resembles the scheming, high-stakes world of the old aristocratic court.
It sounds like an exaggeration at first, but it's the perfect analogy. Think about it. The court was supposed to be the absolute pinnacle of refinement, of culture, elegant conversation.
But underneath that glittering surface
was a constant, simmering cauldron of the darkest human emotions. Greed, envy, lust, pure hatred. Everything was performed with this surface grace, but the reality was absolutely cutthroat.
And that's the connection. Our modern world, we imagine we've moved past all that, We think we're a pinnacle of fairness, of democracy, transparency.
But the sources just remind us those same ugly, fundamental human emotions, they're still stirring inside all of us, just like they have for thousands of years. We're just better at hiding them.
We're more sophisticated in our disguises.
Much more. And this leads to what is really a non-negotiable conclusion from the material. The game of power, this intricate dance of influence, is inescapable.
So you can't just choose not to play.
You can't. It's not a logical choice you can make. If you try to stick transparently to just the surface-level rules of decency and fairness, well, you're just leaving yourself wide open. You'll be crushed by the people around you who realize, maybe just instinctively, that the game is still on.
So you have to understand the nature of the court, even if your king is just the department head or the person funding your project.
Exactly. It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
It is. If we can't opt out, then we have to know how to play. So Let's unpack this. This duplicity that's required to survive in this modern court. We need to look really closely at the original architecture of that aristocratic court to understand the mindset.
Mindset and the behaviors.
Right. Let's get into the iron hand and the velvet glove.
Perfect.
So the fundamental reality of that old court environment was its hierarchy. I mean, everything focused around one central, all-powerful figure.
The king, the emperor, whatever you want to call them.
Or today, the CEO, the venture capitalist, the influential leader. And the courtiers operating around them were in this impossibly delicate position. It was a razor's edge.
Constantly, because the primary task, obviously, was to serve the master, but also to advance your own interests. The real dilemma wasn't just pleasing the ruler.
It was managing the competition.
The relentless competition from your peers. And this is where subtlety became literally a life-or-death skill.
So if a courtier was too obvious about it, if they fawned over the king or tried to curry favor with this, eager, transparent enthusiasm,
the other courtiers would spot it immediately. a mile away. And they wouldn't just see that person as a competitor, they'd see them as a naive fool, or even worse, an overt threat.
And they would move to neutralize them.
Absolutely. They would act to discredit them. So survival, just basic survival, required that any attempt you made to win the master's favor or to advance your own position had to be completely indirect, masked, subtle.
Just sounds exhausting. I mean, the level of constant internal monitoring that requires.
It is. The sources describe how overt force, violent power moves, were totally frowned upon in the supposedly civilized world.
Right. You couldn't just, stab someone in the boardroom.
Exactly. So what they did was work silently, secretly, against any of their rivals who tried to use sheer force or obvious manipulation or even just damaging transparency.
So the result was that anyone who wanted to survive, let alone get ahead, had to develop this almost superhuman level of vigilance.
You had to be constantly anticipating the moves of dozens of other people who were just as motivated and just as smart as you were.
And survival meant you had to appear to be the absolute paragon of elegance.
You had to be graceful, well-mannered, completely dedicated to the master,
Yeah.
while secretly you're dedicating every single ounce of your energy to outwitting and thwarting your opponents.
That's why the arts of indirection became the primary tools. It's like you're playing a civilized war, but all your strategic moves have to be kept utterly secret.
Total secrets.
Can you elaborate on what the sources call the ideal move? The one where the successful courtier manages to, destroy a rival without anyone even realizing they were behind it?
Yes. This is the goal. The most successful courtier mastered what the sources call the ultimate deceptive move. It's delivering a metaphorical stab in the back,
Okay.
but doing it with a velvet glove on his hand and the sweetest of smiles on his face. They weren't winning with old-fashioned coercion or, brute treachery.
They were winning through what? Seduction? Charm?
Seduction, charm, subtle deception, and strategy. Always, always planning, as the sources note, several moves ahead, like a chess grandmaster.
This is the core of modern social strategy, then. You have to be able to influence things without leaving your fingerprints on the operation.
Exactly. And when you look at successful people in any field of politics, business, the arts, you see this indirect approach used over and over again. It's why Napoleon's advice is so central here.
The iron hand inside a velvet glove.
Place your iron hand inside a velvet glove. The hand is your strategy, your immovable resolve, your absolute intent to get what you want. The glove, that's the charm, the decency, the socially acceptable camouflage that stops the opposition from even realizing they need to mobilize against you.
It's a timeless concept.
Mhm.
And it brings us, inevitably, to the foundational voice of this whole pragmatic, indirect approach, Niccolo Machiavelli.
Of course. The Renaissance diplomat who understood the political stakes of survival better than almost anyone, he just stripped away all the moralizing language to look at the cold, hard reality of leadership.
We have to analyze his powerful warning. It's so often misquoted or misunderstood, but it's absolutely central to this deep dive.
Any man who tries to be good all the time is bound to come to ruin among the great number who are not good.
People hear that and they think it's a license to be evil.
It's often taken that way as a mandate for tyranny. But it's so much more nuanced than that. It's a mandate for prudence, for realism.
Explain that distinction.
Machiavelli observed that if you are operating in a world where pretty much everyone is playing a game of self-interest, even if they passionately deny it, and you are the only one who restricts yourself to these strict, moral, transparent codes of conduct, you're not a saint. You're just an easy victim waiting to be devoured.
Is there a historical example of this? Someone who tried to be good all the time and came to ruin?
Oh, absolutely. The sources point to Girolamo Savonarola in late 15th century Florence. He was this incredibly powerful friar, just fueled by righteous anger, and he tried to impose this strict, transparent moral code on a very decadent city.
So he was totally overt about it.
Completely. He publicly attacked the powerful, exposed all their corruption, demanded perfect, absolute goodness and simplicity from everyone. And for a little while it worked. The people followed him. But by being so completely overt, so uncompromisingly good, he made himself this massive, transparent target for every single person he offended, which was basically the entire Florentine elite, up to and including the Pope.
And what happened to him?
He was arrested, tortured, and eventually burned at the stake. He failed because he tried to be good all the time in a world that was simply not good. He refused to play the game.
That's a perfect illustration because it gives us the synthesis for today. Outwardly, we have to respect the niceties. We have to maintain the veneer of fairness and democratic ideals.
But inwardly, we have to be constantly strategic, constantly prudent, ready to execute that iron hand when it's necessary.
And this leads to what the sources call the great achievement of the master courtier, both then and now, the ultimate goal.
Which is to make people bend to your will without their realizing what you have done. It's a manipulation so smooth, so subtle, that the target never actually feels coerced.
And the dividend, the payoff for that extreme subtlety, is the total elimination of resentment.
Exactly. If they don't realize they've been influenced, if they believe they came to the decision all on their own,
They will neither resent nor resist you, which eliminates that inevitable backlash that always comes from overt displays of power. It's the perfect social crime.
it is. It leaves no evidence.
Okay, now this is the section where I think a lot of our listeners might start to feel a bit uncomfortable.
The pushback section.
Yeah. When people hear this description of the game, that it's inescapable, that it requires guile, they often recoil and say, "That's not me. I operate above all that. I choose to opt out."
They believe they can succeed by only doing things that have, quote, nothing to do with power.
Right. And that is the central, and the sources say, dangerous illusion.
It's a huge warning. You have to beware of people like that. Because while they're loudly expressing these opinions on the outside, often claiming some kind of moral superiority,
They are frequently among the most adept players of the power game. They just cloak their ambition in this moralizing language.
they can't truly opt out. Because the hunger for power, or at the very least for control over your own life, is elemental. It's in all of us. So instead of being transparently ambitious, they deploy these very specific strategies that cleverly disguise the nature of their manipulation.
And we need to spend some serious time detailing these four deceptive strategies. Because once you can recognize them, you start to realize just how few people are actually standing outside the arena.
Everyone's in the arena.
Okay, let's start with strategy one, displaying weakness as moral virtue. This is that highly visible act of publicizing one's weakness or lack of resources or supposed powerlessness to gain sympathy and respect.
We see this everywhere. The employee who constantly talks about how overwhelmed they are, the friend who recounts their emotional trauma in exhaustive detail.
The organization that constantly emphasizes how underfunded it is. The goal is always to generate some kind of protective shield or deflect responsibility or get aid.
And the sources offer this just brutal, precise analysis of this behavior. If a person were truly, genuinely powerless with no self-interest at all, they would have no reason whatsoever to publicize that weakness.
Because true powerlessness is what? Silent.
It's silent, it's invisible, and it's miserable. Therefore, the deliberate act of making a show of your weakness is, paradoxically, a very subtle and highly effective deceptive power strategy. It's an attention magnet, and attention is a form of power.
So this moralized weakness, the sources specifically frame it as a strategic move. They connect it to what we refer to here as Law 22, the surrender tactic.
Exactly. For anyone not familiar with that specific law, the surrender tactic basically advises you to strategically retreat or appear completely harmless and weak in order to disarm an opponent and regroup.
You use their own assumptions about weakness against them.
Precisely. The non-player uses moral weakness in the exact same way. By appearing harmless, people drop their guard, they offer you resources, they stop seeing you as a threat.
The person in the office who seems too frail to manage a difficult project
Often uses that to redirect all the hard work and the risk onto other people while still getting to share in the benefits of the team's success. It's power via pity. It's so subtle. Okay, let's move to the second strategy, which is just pervasive in modern social and political talk. Demanding universal equality.
The stated belief here is that to avoid the stain of power, the taint of aristocracy, everyone must be treated exactly alike, regardless of their status, their strength, their ability.
On the surface, who could argue with that? It sounds like fairness.
Of course. But the sources are critiquing the enforcement of strict equality as a power mechanism in itself. And here's the critical distinction they make. Trying to treat everyone absolutely equally ignores the natural differences in skill, in effort, in innate talent that just exist between people.
Some people are just better at certain things.
Some people are. They produce more, or they produce better quality work. And treating everyone the same, the sources argue, inevitably leads to elevating the less skillful or the less productive. You ensure they get the same reward as the people who excel.
And at the same time, it actively suppresses the people who do demonstrate excellence. Right, because their success threatens the whole principle of uniform equality. It basically forces mediocrity on the group as a mandatory policy.
So if I'm getting this critical perspective right, the argument is that this doesn't actually create a fair system. It just replaces a natural hierarchy with an artificial one.
That's it exactly. And here's the hidden power play. The people who most vehemently enforce this strict equality are often deploying a power strategy themselves. It's one that allows them to decide how everything gets redistributed.
So they gain power not by excelling, but by becoming the referee.
The neutral arbiters, the regulators, the moral authority that determines who deserves what, regardless of actual output. It gives them control over everyone else's rewards and resources, which is a massive form of control over the system itself. They control the game by controlling the rule book, all under the guise of fairness.
That completely shifts the structure of accountability. Okay, let's talk about strategy 3, perfect honesty and straightforwardness.
Since deceit and subtlety are the main tools of the power seekers, the moralizers try to counter this with perfect honesty. They want to seem virtuous and above the game. They claim to be transparent to a fault.
And the sources say this is where people who try to live by pure transparency always get into trouble.
The backlash is swift, and it's usually very harsh. Our sources state that being perfectly brutally honest will inevitably hurt and insult a great many people.
Why though? Why does honesty backfire so badly?
Because absolute honesty is always perceived subjectively, never objectively. No one hears a perfectly honest statement as just a fact. People always assume there's some personal, malicious, or self-serving motive behind what the truth teller is saying.
So if you tell someone a difficult truth, like your work isn't good enough or that idea is foolish,
they will not thank you for your honesty. They will immediately resent you, and they will look for a way to injure you in return. You've just made a powerful enemy for absolutely no strategic gain.
but looking at this through a pure strategy lens, is there no place for objective truth? Are the sources really arguing that any honesty is a manipulation? Or is it more about selective honesty?
They argue that even the use of honesty, especially when you flaunt it, is inherently a power strategy. It's meant to convince people of your noble, good-hearted, selfless character. It establishes a moral high ground.
So if you're constantly telling people how honest you are,
You're trying to persuade them to trust you without question. It's a form of moral coercion. It's designed to force others to submit to your judgment. If you claim to be the only truly honest person in the room, you are claiming a superior position of moral judgment and control over the whole narrative. It's a very heavy mask to wear.
and that explains why the brutally honest person often ends up so isolated. They project this moral authority that everyone else just instinctively resists.
Precisely.
Okay, finally we get to strategy 4. Affecting an air of naivete, the classic, "Who, little old me, I don't know anything about that" approach.
Yes, used primarily to protect against the accusation of being after power. It's this calculated inability to understand complexity.
And once again, we see that the appearance of naivete can be an incredibly effective means of deceit. The sources link this to another law, Law 21, which advises you to seem dumber than your mark.
And to clarify that for listeners, Law 21 suggests that by appearing less intelligent, less sophisticated, or just less informed than you really are, you make people lower their defenses.
And they talk more freely.
They talk more freely, they reveal their own strategies, and they completely underestimate how shrewd you are. The person who says, "Oh, I'm just terrible with budgets, can you walk me through the details very slowly?" might actually be gathering crucial intelligence.
Or just avoiding a complex responsibility while making you feel superior.
Right.
But what about people who are genuinely innocent? Let's take that really challenging example the sources bring up. Children. They don't have reflection and experience, but they still operate from a desire for control.
It's such a fascinating psychological point. Even genuinely innocent people, like little kids, often act from this elemental, almost desperate need to gain control over their environment and the adults around them.
They suffer from feeling powerless in the adult world.
They suffer greatly from it, and they'll use any means available, tears, charm, selective incompetence, to get their way. The sources note they are often horribly effective at the game, precisely because they're not hindered by reflection.
They aren't held back by moral analysis. They just act on that elemental impulse for control.
And that means even if the motivation isn't malicious, even if it's completely unconscious, the effect is still this relentless pursuit of control and power. You're right, it really does show that no one can truly opt out.
So what's the final judgment on these supposed non-players?
The final judgment is decisive. They may flaunt their moral qualities, their piety, their sense of justice, their simplicity. But since all of us hunger for power, almost all of our actions are aimed at gaining control, regardless of our self-image. They're simply, and I quote, throwing dust in our eyes.
They're just skillfully using indirect manipulation, maybe unconsciously.
Often unconsciously. And they deeply resent anyone publicizing the very tactics they employ every single day. They're playing the game, but they passionately refuse to admit the game even exists, which makes them hypocrites, and often dangerous, unwitting bunglers.
So the ultimate conclusion for us then is if the world is this giant scheming court and we're all trapped inside it, trying to opt out just makes you powerless and miserable.
It is far better to stop struggling against the inevitable and instead to excel at power.
Okay, so we've established the game is on, whether we like it or not. The strategies have to be indirect.
Yeah.
But learning this game, actually applying it successfully, that requires a huge shift in perspective.
A fundamental shift. It takes dedicated effort, practice, and certain basic skills that are not natural. They have to be acquired, almost like learning a new language.
And the crucial foundation for all this isn't about mastering other people, is it? It's about mastering yourself.
That's right. It starts with the self. The sources identify the single greatest barrier to gaining or keeping power as an emotional response to a situation. Emotions, in the heat of the moment, they cloud reason.
So when you react emotionally, when you let your feelings drive your actions,
You immediately lose control and clarity. That temporary satisfaction of, venting your anger or expressing your joy, it will invariably cost you significantly more than that fleeting moment of release. If you can't see the situation clearly, if you're blinded by emotion, you cannot prepare for it or respond to it with any degree of strategic control.
let's break down the two most common and destructive emotional responses we have to master. First up, anger. What makes anger so uniquely destructive in the power game?
Anger is the most destructive because it clouds your vision more than any other emotion. It's inherently transparent. Everyone sees your frustration, which immediately shows your enemies your weak spots.
And it has a ripple effect.
A huge one. It makes situations exponentially less controllable, and crucially, it heightens your enemy's resolve. If you're trying to defeat an opponent who has hurt you, the sources advise it's far better to keep them off guard by faking friendliness.
The Casanova approach.
Exactly. Use charm rather than showing the rage they expect to see. They will fight you much harder if they see your anger.
That makes perfect sense. Anger just feeds the conflict.
Yeah.
Now, what about the other major emotional hurdle? Love and affection. I mean, these are generally seen as positive things.
And they are positive forces in personal life. But they can be destructive in the pursuit of power because they blind you to the often self-serving interests of the people you trust the most.
So when you're deeply emotionally invested in someone,
You automatically dismiss the idea that the person you care for is also playing their own power game, or that they might unconsciously act in a way that harms your strategic position. Your blind trust makes you incredibly vulnerable to their inevitable self-interest.
so what's the balance here? The texts say we can't and we shouldn't try to repress these feelings entirely. We're human, we're going to feel them.
Absolutely. The goal is not to become a robot. The requirement is to be incredibly careful about how you express them. And most importantly, these powerful, turbulent feelings should never, ever be allowed to influence your practical plans and your strategies.
So your mind has to stay cold and calculating.
For the execution of your plan, yes, regardless of the warmth or irritation you might feel inside. You have to learn to set your feelings aside when you're plotting a course of action.
And related to this emotional mastery is the ability to sort of distance yourself from the present moment, to think objectively about both the past and the future. This is where the sources use that really powerful Roman mythology analogy.
The two faces of Janus.
Right, the double-faced Roman deity, the guardian of gates. You have to cultivate this ability to look backward and forward at the same time, to better anticipate and handle danger from wherever it might come.
Let's start with the future-facing eye. The motto for this, derived from the sources, is simple and powerful. No days on alert.
Relentless preparation.
Relentless. It means constantly imagining problems before they even arise. Instead of wasting valuable time dreaming about your plan's happy ending, you have to dedicate yourself to calculating every possible permutation and pitfall that might emerge.
You have to think like a military strategist.
Exactly. Like Sun Tzu, whose wisdom is woven all through this material, he was obsessed with preparation, not with hope. The further you can see into the future, the more steps ahead you can plan, the more powerful you become. Power comes from foresight, not optimism.
So if you're constantly imagining problems, you're always ready to solve them.
Instantly. And then there's the past-facing eye. Now, this is not for remembering old hurts or bearing grudges, which, as we said, only curbs your power and leads to emotional mistakes.
Right. The sources say half the game is learning how to actively forget things that eat at you and cloud your reason.
The true purpose of looking backward is constant self-education. You look at the past, the grand historical examples, the strategists, the statesmen, the seducers, but most importantly, you look at your own actions. This self-analysis is the most essential school of power,
So you have to forensically examine your own past mistakes.
especially the ones that have most grievously held you back. You analyze them using this pragmatic framework of the laws of power, and you ask yourself, which law did I transgress here? And from that analysis, you must extract two things: a lesson and a rigid personal oath.
And the oath is.
The oath is, I shall never repeat such a mistake. I shall never fall into such a trap again. This ability to honestly evaluate yourself and consciously break old, damaging emotional patterns is the skill that absolutely separates the master player from the bungler.
So if that internal self-mastery is the foundation, what about the external requirements? Power requires this external ability to play with appearances.
It means learning to wear many masks and always keeping a bag full of deceptive tricks.
Yeah, and we're conditioned by, surface-level morality to see deception and masquerade as inherently ugly or immoral.
But the sources argue this is a profound misunderstanding of how humans interact. All civilized interaction requires deception on many levels. Just think about the simple act of being polite. That's often a social deception to avoid hurt feelings or conflict.
In a way, our ability to lie, to dissimulate, is what separates us from animals.
It's a highly developed art of civilization. And the sources connect this to ancient myth, arguing that in many cultures, Greek, Indian, Middle Eastern, the privilege of using these deceptive arts often belonged to the gods themselves.
It's a powerful reframing. Figures like Odysseus were celebrated not just for their strength, but for their matis, their cunning, their ability to rival the craftiness of the divine.
Exactly. By matching the gods in wits and deception, they were essentially stealing a measure of divine power. So deception is framed as this key, civilized component in acquiring power, not just some unfortunate necessity.
But to succeed at it, you have to take a distanced approach to yourself.
You have to be able to be many different people, wearing whatever mask the day and the moment require. This flexible approach, it relieves a tremendous amount of inward heaviness that holds people down when they rigidly insist on being authentic or the same person all the time.
So if deception is the most potent weapon in your arsenal, what's the crucial shield? The sources say without this, all the other skills are basically useless.
The crucial shield is patience in all things. Patience will protect you from what the sources bluntly call moronic blunders.
And it's a skill that must be acquired.
It must be, just like emotional mastery, because nothing about true power is natural. Power, in this refined, strategic sense, is described as more godlike than anything in the natural world.
Like the gods and the myths.
Yeah.
They have all the time in the world.
They have nothing but time. Everything they want will eventually happen. The seasons will change, the cycles will turn, if they just give it time and see several steps into the future. Impatience, on the other hand, just makes you look weak, desperate, short-sighted. It's labeled a principal impediment to power because it forces you to rush your moves, which just increases the likelihood of error and exposure. Mastery requires the long view.
We've arrived now at what might be the most challenging mindset shift this material requires.
Yeah.
Fully embracing the amoral perspective.
This one is tough for people to get their heads around.
It is. Our sources state, unequivocally, that power is essentially amoral. It just exists, like gravity or the weather. It's independent of our human moralizing.
And if power is amoral, the most important skill to acquire is the ability to see circumstances exactly as they are, rather than getting caught up in these constant, distracting judgments of good or evil.
You have to repeat the mantra, power is a game.
It's a game. And in a game, you don't judge your opponents by their intentions, you judge them strictly by the effect of their actions.
Why is that distinction so critical?
Because intentions are so often used deliberately to cloud and deceive. It's the ultimate deflection. What does it matter if someone tells you they intended good things or they only had your interests at heart if the tangible effects of their actions led directly to ruin and confusion for you or your organization?
You can't eat good intentions.
Exactly. It is entirely natural for people to cover up their selfish actions with all kinds of moral justifications, always claiming they acted out of goodness or justice or love. You have to train yourself to inwardly laugh every time you hear this and never get caught up in gauging their intentions.
Because those judgments are often just an excuse.
Just a thin excuse for accumulating moral leverage or actual power. You have to train your eye to follow the results of their moves, the outward measurable circumstances, and not be distracted by anything else.
And this objective, amoral perspective also applies fiercely to yourself,
Yeah.
to what you allow to contaminate your own strategic focus.
Oh, absolutely. Half of your mastery of power comes from what you do not allow yourself to get dragged into.
For this, you have to learn to judge all things ruthlessly by what they cost you, personally, strategically. This is where the sources bring in Nietzsche's principle.
Which has to be applied universally. The value of a thing sometimes lies not in what one attains with it, but in what one pays for it, what it costs us.
So you might attain a goal, maybe it's a worthy goal, but what was the total price? In time, resources, energy, peace of mind.
You have to apply that unforgiving standard to every single decision, including whether you collaborate with other people or come to their aid in a crisis. Life is strategically short, opportunities are few, and you have limited energy. Time and mental capacity are your most critical, non-renewable assets.
Therefore, the golden rule of self-preservation has to be, never waste valuable time or mental peace of mind on the affairs of others. That is too high a price to pay.
The cost of getting entangled in someone else's drama or their battles will inevitably erode your own power base. And often, the only person who benefits is the one who successfully recruited your help.
And since power is, at its heart, a social game, the master player must become, above all else, a master psychologist.
A master psychologist. You have to develop the ability to study, analyze, and understand people on a deep level. Penetrating beyond the mask, they show the world.
There's that great quote from Baltasar Gracian, the 17th century Spanish courtier whose writing heavily informs this material.
It's a mandate that should be tacked above every computer screen.
It really should. Many people spend time studying the properties of animals or herbs. How much more important it would be to study those of people with whom we must live or die.
The master psychologist has to be able to instantly recognize motivations, detect patterns of weakness, and see through that cloud of dust that surrounds people's actions.
And this understanding of people's hidden fundamental motives, the real drivers beneath the moral surface, that's the single greatest piece of knowledge you can have.
It's terrifyingly potent. It opens up endless possibilities of deception, seduction, and manipulation. People are infinitely complex, inconsistent, driven by hidden anxieties. You could spend a lifetime studying them, so this education has to start now, and it has to be constant.
And in this study, you have to keep one rigid principle in mind about trust and vigilance.
Never discriminate as to whom you study and whom you trust. You must never trust anyone completely, not your closest colleague, not your longest friend, and you must study everyone, including friends and loved ones.
The moment you stop studying someone is the moment they become strategically dangerous to you.
And this brings us full circle, back to the core lesson of the entire source material. Always take the indirect route to power, never be overt, always disguise your cunning. Your moves, like a billiard ball, must carom several times before they hit their target. By constantly training yourself to be indirect, subtle, and strategic, you can thrive in the modern court.
Appearing the paragon of decency while being the consummate manipulator.
That's the art.
Okay, let's bring this synthesis home. This has been a really extensive deep dive into the underlying architecture of social influence, drawing on 3,000 years of strategic thought.
The core concept we've really extracted is that by mastering these arts of indirection, by practicing that iron emotional control, strategic foresight, penetrating psychological understanding, and infinite patience, you become the consummate manipulator.
While, and this is the key, simultaneously appearing perfectly fair and decent. You maintain the veneer of the civilized world while wielding decisive influence underneath it.
And if the game of power is truly inescapable, as all the sources argue it is, then it's fundamentally far better to be an artist of the game, a subtle player, than a naive denier or, a clumsy bungler.
And this is where we hit that challenging paradox. The sources argue that the better you are at dealing with power, the better friend, lover, and person you actually become.
It seems counterintuitive.
It does. How can amorality lead to better relationships?
Because mastery allows you to be graceful. You learn how to make others feel better about themselves because you're no longer focused on your own insecurity or your own neediness. You become a stable, calming force.
And you spare them pain.
Crucially, you spare your friends and loved ones the pain that comes from bungling with power, from them playing with these subtle currents of influence without understanding their properties. You save them from their own strategic clumsiness by preempting or smoothing over their mistakes.
This material isn't just, abstract theory. It's a distillation of wisdom spanning 3 millennia.
Drawn from some of the most successful, insightful, and strategic figures in history, we've seen how the principles of strategists like Sun Tzu and Clausewitz, the wisdom of courtiers like Gracian, and the finesse of seducers like Casanova are all woven into this singular framework.
And the laws detailed in this material are described as timeless and definitive.
Observance increases your power. Transgression leads to strategic ruin. They're just inescapable.
And we should end with a serious warning about this study. Power is endlessly seductive. It's a strategic labyrinth that can consume your mind with solving its infinite problems and contradictions.
You can't be frivolous with this. The sources warn that the gods of power frown on the frivolous. They give ultimate satisfaction only to those who study and reflect, and punish those who skim the surfaces looking for a good time.
Mastery requires solemn reflection and consistent application.
Absolutely.
So as you reflect on the necessity of appearing fair and decent in your own life, your own organization, consider this final provocative thought. Given that the ability to deceive is what separates humans from animals and was judged as a divine power in ancient myths, think about a recent highly public act of proclaimed virtue or perfect honesty that you've observed.
Analyze that act through a Machiavellian lens.
Exactly. What was the actual cost of that honesty to the person who displayed it? And what subtle moral leverage or soft coercion did they actually acquire as a result of their virtue signaling?
Think about the hidden pursuit of power that's inherent in every single moral display.